The Sunday Papers
on Off the Ball.
Welcome along to the Sunday pay-per-view here on Off the Ball. Plenty to sink our teeth into on this Sunday. Particularly a lot of coverage on this day from the fallout from the Grand National and the protesters at Aintree yesterday afternoon. There's plenty of really good GAA coverage. I think it's been possible to focus this weekend because we've got two quarterfinals in the Ulster Football Championship, that there's a lot of coverage which is focused particularly around today's game between Tyrone and Monaghan and the sweeper keepers, which we'll have a look at. Some of the fallout from Lee Chin and the racial slur which was shouted at him last Saturday at a charity game in Tipperary, and understandably a lot about the Premier League, Arsenal, where Liverpool go from here. Potentially the great red reset is across quite a few of the papers today as well, and we'll be looking at an excellent interview with Irish athletics legend Katrina McKiernan as well. Let's take a look at what's making the back pages then today. On the back of the Sunday World, you've got Cop Out and Jude bid fail could bell toll for Jorg. So this is the fact that Liverpool have reportedly pulled out of the race to sign Jude Bellingham, who have been their number one target as they look to rejuvenate their midfield this summer. Substandard decision by Ten Hag hurts Reds, is Paul McGrath talking about Manchester United's collapse against Sevilla midweek in the Europa League quarter-finals. And Man City close on Arsenal by Kevin Palmer. That's Manchester City winning at ease against Leicester 3-1 yesterday. And Erling Haaland now has got 32 Premier League goals for this season, which is the same record, well, equals the record for 38 games. And he's now just two behind Alan Shearer and Andy Cole, who holds the record for when there was more than 20 teams in the top flight in England. Elsewhere, we're looking at the Grand National. Of course, this is across all the papers today, but a very clever headline at the back of the Sunday World: Fox evades protesters to take the National. That is Sligo man Derek Fox, after he became a Grand National winning jockey yesterday on Cork Rambler, who went off as favourite and won the race. Looking at the rest of the back pages then for today, First Bell is again focusing on Jude Bellingham and who is going to sign him this summer. Manchester City are seen as the favourites according to Simon Mullock, who's got an exclusive in the Sunday Mirror Sport. Also an interesting one on the back of the news that broke on Thursday, which is that the Premier League are to ban shirt sponsors on the front of the shirt for gambling companies. And Odegaard Johnson, the former Bolton, Barcelona and Chelsea striker, has said that he lost over £6 million gambling during his career. So he's among those who is welcoming the ban from 2026 of shirt sponsorship at the front by gambling companies, though they will still be able to sponsor other parts of the stadium and indeed other parts of the shirt from 2026 on. There are currently 8 Premier League teams who've got a shirt sponsor at the front with a gambling company as things stand. On the Sun Sport today, Evans ache, which is Evan Ferguson going off injured during Brighton's win against Chelsea. His manager Roberto De Zerbi said after the game he's likely to be out for a couple of weeks, but they'll have to wait for a further assessment on that. So Ireland striker facing Cup semi-final KO for next week is the bad news for Evan Ferguson. Sly Fox wins the National, also looking at Cork Ramblers' victory at Aintree, and no light in the tunnel for Lamp by Dan King. Chelsea again beaten and massively outplayed yesterday by Brighton ahead of playing Real Madrid in the Champions League midweek, where they're already 2-0 down from the first leg. Also in some of the rest of the papers today, let's have a look at the back of the Sunday Times. Scottish National Party is looking at Cork Ramblers' victory. Liverpool step up interest in Bayern midfielder Gravenberch as they move on from Jude Bellingham, and Cullen hugely excited by Nienarber's Leinster switch. So it's announced that Jack Nienarber, the current head coach of the South Africa team ahead of the World Cup, will leave the Springboks after the World Cup to effectively replace Stuart Lancaster on the coaching team at Leinster. And David Walsh on the back of the Times today is writing about Erling Haaland, not about his goals. Everyone's talking about the goals he scored this year, but he's talking about the pass that he made for Bernardo Silva during the week against Bayern Munich, showing that he is not a selfish striker. Plenty of Gaelic games on the Independent. Back of the Sunday Indo today, you've got Derry on fire. Champions set out their stall in Ulster, defending the Anglo-Celt for the first time this century. They eased to victory yesterday against Fermanagh. US Group's late bid to buy stake in Manchester United. Tom Morgan's story at the front of the paper. An American bidder has now emerged who could potentially come in as a third bidder as time starts to tick down on the Glazers selling Manchester United. Eamon Sweeney has gone for silence of accusers speaks volumes, talking in support of Vera Pauw on the back of Ireland's 2 friendlies in the USA, where she was accused by the National League over there of mistreatment of players, which of course Vera Pauw has strongly denied ever since. And Craig Breen loved rallying, and rallying loved him back. Looking back at Craig Breen, who very tragically passed away on Thursday in Croatia at the age of just 33. And we've got the Mail on Sunday as well. They don't get racing. Legend McCoy vents fury as protesters disrupt the National. That was AP McCoy speaking on ITV's racing coverage, which is carried here in Virgin Media as well, on the back of the protesters holding up the entry to Grand National by 15 minutes. And then another interesting one as well, which is the story of Martinelli, who's got 14 goals in the Premier League for Arsenal this year. Brazil backwater to world's best strike force. They look at Bukayo Saka, but particularly on Martinelli, who was seen as very light in Brazil and not seen as a player who was potentially going to make it at the very top, and his rise at Arsenal over the last couple of seasons. Delighted to say to have a look at the papers today. In studio with me, I've got Conán Doherty now of The Independent. How you going, Conán?
Hi Will, how are you?
And we've got Jason Byrne from The Sun as well, who's with us virtually by Zoom. How you getting on, Jason?
Morning, lads. How's things?
Good. The papers, look, there's probably a mix of a few different things here. I didn't get to talk about them because they're bang smack in the middle of it. The Irish women's team have got a lot of coverage in various papers as well, particularly on the back of the comments during the week, and that article which was in the Telegraph, which is the report that apparently somebody in the RFU at a club function had said, who gives an F about women's rugby. And then the defeat that happened in Parma yesterday, which has left Ireland staring down the barrel of potentially a wooden spoon, particularly with England to come next in the tournament. We've a lot of good GAA coverage because of the fact, Conán, I think when it comes to the GAA coverage, they were able to focus down for this week. If you look at the schedule for next week, there's a start of the hurling, there's a lot of provincial championship on. This time around there was an opportunity to maybe tease out some of the stories, particularly today around Monaghan and Tyrone.
Yeah, well, they also wanted to give the opportunity to give Derry the spotlight, on the opening weekend as they forego on their journey now to the All-Ireland. Very slow weekend, especially after it started so quickly last week, and obviously with everything that happened out in New York as well. But it was a good opportunity, as you say, to take a pause. And I think some of the stuff that we've gotten, especially from Malachy OConnor in the Irish Times, has been brilliant, and it's a good opportunity to really just mark some of these careers. It could end up being some of the last seasons for some of these players as well, like Conor McManus. It's
a good interview for him to get. We want to kick off with that. Conor McManus, who has been so crucially important to this Monaghan team, albeit there's 3 or 4 new players coming in for Championship, he's still seen as so central to what's going to happen at home this afternoon.
Yeah, well, and of course he is, because I've heard some of the criticism of Monaghan has been that they're still relying on the same players. Of course they are, because not only is it a small county with a small pool, but they produced some of the best footballers that we've seen in our generation, and of course they would still be relying on them. And I always find it interesting when players hit the age of, I don't know, McManus is 35 now, but sometimes when players hit 30, people start saying, well, they're not going to be around forever, we need to start replacing them. And you produce this player as an 18-year-old to get the most out of him the whole way through, and McManus is still one of the best. Like the stats bear it out. The fact that he's looking into his 60th consecutive championship start, as Malachy OConnor talked to him about today against Tyrone, is phenomenal stuff. The way he's done it, the class with which he's done it, the clutch with which he's brought as well. And Clerkin has a great line in it about McManus's hips. He's never been injured, obviously, for a championship game. If you're getting 65 appearances in total, 60 consecutively, you're doing something right. But he said his hips are a junior minister in a coalition government of Conor McManus. He abuses them as much as he wants, knowing that they'll never quit on him. And that's just a lovely sort of line to sum up not how Conor McManus treats his body, but how his body treats
so versatile,
him. His body's always there for him, and Conor McManus is always there for Monaghan as well. And this is the thing, once again, and I know it's not new analysis, but Monaghan haven't been relegated. But I looked at them at the start of the year, even when they had lost their first couple of games, and I thought, geez, don't write this team off. They've got loads of firepower, and Vinnie Corey's obviously Mr. Monaghan, but he's got them all working as well. If you can get firepower working, that's basically been the Tyrone model for 20 years. It's all these class players who will do the job for the county, and I have a sneaky feeling, I'm not going to predict Monaghan to win, but I have a feeling they'll run Tyrone a lot closer than people maybe think.
Jason, this is a good get for Malachy, isn't it, on game week? We were talking here on Friday about the fact that Quigley was speaking to the GAA Social on the BBC, and eventually they had to come out very quickly and say, you know what, he's not been dropped because of what he said during the week, because he was so loose-lipped in his comments there. It is actually a hamstring injury. But to get McManus on the eve of a huge championship game for both Monaghan and Tyrone is a good get for Malachy today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, but you know what, it doesn't surprise me, because that's just the way Conor is. From a media point of view, he's an absolute dream. There's been many times I've gotten him on the phone, albeit maybe not this close to a big championship game, but you could ring him there on a Tuesday and he might be at work or something, but he would always get back to you. He would always stop outside the dressing room after a game, win, lose or draw, and he's just a great fella. I remember a few years ago, a friend of a friend was in a sticky situation health wise, and my friend asked me to get maybe a few inter-county players to send them videos to kind of give them as well wishes and give them a bit of a boost. And I remember texting Conán McManus, and I think within 10 minutes he'd replied with a 2-3 minute video. And those are the small things that he would do regularly that you don't really hear about. And we're always plumosing about what he does on the pitch, and kicking the 1-7 against Mayo to keep Monaghans up and stuff like that, and talking about his age and that. But it's the mark of a man that he is off the field, and he's always just had that grounding about him and that bit of approachability from a media point of view in a way that doesn't surprise me that he spoke to Malachy. And it's a great piece, and it doesn't really surprise me at all. But it is sad to see that maybe the BBC Social had to come out and clarify that Sean Quigley wasn't dropped over the comments he made on that podcast as well, which is a great listen to. And the fact that he was injured, the whole thing's very sanitised now and can be very, very hard to access these players. So kudos to Malachy nonetheless. It's a great piece and a great chat with a brilliant fella and an exceptional footballer. And as Conán mentioned there, he is 35. He's not going to be around forever, and I expect him to have a big day in Healy Park today.
Not to get too far off the beaten track here, Jason, but when it comes to the Quigley interview as well, it sparked a tremendous amount of debate because of the fact that, in a way, he's spoken a little bit old school, where he's saying that pretty much, in his opinion, there's plenty of athletic footballers out there who could put the head down, work really hard and become an inter-county footballer, but maybe some of the skills of the past had been lost. It's probably opened up a huge debate, I think, over the last week about this idea that players are becoming robots, or this idea that maybe some of the ingenuity that would have been there in the past is now being coached out of the game.
Yeah, it's a very good point, and it's a stick that's often used to beat Ulster football with, but I think it applies to the whole country now. And you see it there in underage teams, from minor level up. It's just it is very robotic, and everyone's kind of mirroring the same thing. And Billy McMahon kind of addressed the same thing in his Irish Independent column yesterday as well. That the level of Ulster football can be slapped on any team now, particularly at senior inter-county level. Like, Quigley didn't come out with those comments just for the crack. Like, he meant it. That's how he feels, and fair play to him for opening up and speaking about it. And he shouldn't be punished or slapped for that. And I don't think he is. A lot of people really enjoyed that interview and really commended his honesty. And if that's how he feels, that's how he feels. He does have the raw talent. That's the thing. He does have. He does deserve to be on an inter-county team, but he's obviously witnessing this, and he's spoken out about it. And fair play to him for having the guts to do it. But there is definitely, like, a lot of the fundamentals of the game aren't being coached properly, especially at underage level, and we're seeing that transfer into senior inter-county teams now. And they're hitting the gym maybe more than they should be working on some of their basic skills. And if I can definitely see where he was coming from, having watched like a lot of club football around Donegal last year as well, where I am at the minute. It's gone very robotic, and it's all systems and positions instead of just trying to work on the fundamental skills of the game. And it's swept the whole country, to be honest, as far as I can see. I don't know what Conán thinks, but I'm sure he wouldn't be too far from disagreeing with me there.
Yeah, well, even if you go to the analysis at the Derry Fermanagh game yesterday, and they were also bang on, but they're so critical. Like, Fermanagh had dared to open up a little bit, and then it's what's the analysis? It's how stupid are they? We all know what Derry are going to do. You go back to 2011, this is 12 years ago. Armagh, my reference points are Derry, but Armagh opened up against Derry in the Ulster semi-final. Derry suddenly get to their first Ulster final in God knows how long, since 2000 actually, and Joe Brawley of all people was saying how stupid they were to not play a sweeper in front of Owen Bradley and Mark Lynch. If Joe Brawley could go back and look at himself there now, but this that doesn't help either. So it's stupid to play football in a certain way now, and people are largely right as well, but it's not going to change things in the grander scheme.
No, especially when I saw during the week, people were complaining after witnessing a stats guy going around at under 12 goal games during the week. Like, that is the absolute extreme, obviously. But there is that feeling as the coaching trickles down along the way, the players at a younger and younger age are now being prepared for the elite level of Gaelic football as opposed to going out and enjoying the game. Yeah,
and look, we've all sort of been experienced or exposed to those stats that are being read out at underage games, and it's just going in one ear and out the other. And normally it's read at half time, and they just spit a pile of stats at you, and they don't mean anything. They're not using them to change anything for the second half. They just give you all the stats because it's now cool to do. But that does happen. I mean, club football mirrors eventually what intercounty football is doing, and then underage football mirrors what senior club is doing. And I find it interesting now at the minute that senior intercounty is actually very much man on man, because again, everybody's attacking and everybody's defending, and that's nowhere near what the club level's at the minute. But the club game, what I'm looking at, sometimes looks a bit smarter than the intercounty game, because I'm thinking, why would you want to go man on man against some of these players? They'll just take it past you. They're too good one on one, and that's almost a shame that I'm looking at it that way. I'm looking at football thinking, geez, do not leave yourself one on one in a game against these players like that. That would be criminal. But the club game, I feel like, is better set up than the county game at the minute.
Well, we were debating here on Tuesday, and look, I think the genuine feeling was the way that Clare played last weekend, and the way many of the teams who came out on top, Offaly against Longford, went really defensive in the second half, maybe played slightly against their instincts, but went out in a way to win a championship game. New York and Leitrim was enjoyable because of the fact that there wasn't actually that type of defensive setup there. There were plenty of mistakes and there were goal chances that were missed, and it doesn't matter to Leitrim now because they're out of the championship whether they entertained the neutral or not, or whether New York was a great story. But in a way, I actually enjoyed that game because it was almost the antithesis to a lot of what we saw on the Sunday.
Yeah, but now I'm having a lot of introspection here where I'm looking at myself thinking, I looked at that game and thought, this is crazy. What's going on? Like the analysis I came away from that game was, this looks like a training match, really enjoyable, but everybody was running everywhere, everybody wanted to get on the ball, and that's something that we probably shouldn't be criticising them for. It just looked a bit shapeless to me, and when I say shapeless, it's just a different shape to what we're used to. Everybody get back and everybody get forward. This was just a case of a player got the ball, they kicked it, they ran after it. They were all excited to do something with it, and I think the 3G pitch probably helped with the pace of it as well, and the crowd being in on top. But very much felt like an in-house game. That was a very enjoyable in-house game. But maybe again, that's a good argument, because I'm always reluctant to write the death of football, because we've been having this conversation for over a decade now. But maybe that's just a good example of, sometimes there are pretty good games, and when they come around, we should just enjoy them.
Yeah, look, Jason, I reckon I'm definitely going to really enjoy the game this afternoon, because I reckon this is going to be an arm wrestle between Tyrone and Monaghan, two Division 1 teams going up against each other. A lot of stakes in the first round, and we know how important Ulster is to all the teams who are competing in it, and they will probably look at the opportunity for a really, really exciting semi-final against Derry for the winners this afternoon as well. Mick Foley has written about Tyrone, and I like the line that he used at the top of his piece, page 16 of the Times today, which is that this is now Tyrone's time to prove that they still have it. So there is that lingering doubt maybe about last year in their defence of the title, whether this Tyrone team, Jason, can get back up to where they were in 2021.
Yeah, and Mick makes a great comparison here to what happened at Donegal in 2013. I remember leaving Croke Park that day. I think it's the only time I've ever left the Donegal championship game early. Mayo were absolutely beating them out the gate, and the whole thing had just totally collapsed after 2012. And Jim McGinnis was addressing the group that day and addressing the media that was this going to be their legacy, and they came back to reach the All-Ireland final again the next year, defeating Dublin, albeit losing to Kerry, and maybe could have snatched a replay, but Kerry kind of done a Donegal on it and outfoxed them at their own tactics. But it's kind of a very similar crossroads where Tyrone are at right now. Last year it just totally fell apart for them. Like the title defence was just so limp. I know they lost 7 players, but like if you look through the starting team, they'd won the All-Ireland in 2021, and the starting team from today, like I think Conor McKenna is the only real notable absentee from the starting 15. Matty Donnelly starting inside today as well, and they've got Rory Gallagher on the bench. And slowly as the league went on this year, they did seem to kind of, Mark O'Shea's kind of got a bit of overlap with Mick's piece in his column in the Mail on Sunday today, in terms of Tyrone having a cause, and he feels like they have that cause again. And the sight of the Kerry jersey coming home a few weeks ago got that spark out of them, and they just seem to have all the wheels turning properly again. Like people were accusing their 2021 title of being a fluke, but that's very, very unfair, because how they dismantled Kerry in that All-Ireland semi-final was an absolute masterclass. And there was that fascinating Ulster final at Croke Park against Monaghan as well, which is of course the rematch today in Omagh, and the fascinating duel between the two goalkeepers, which ties in as well to Dermot's piece in the Sunday Independent. So they seem to have that bit about them again. They seem to have that kind of fire back in the belly that just wasn't there last year. Losing to Derry in Omagh, fair enough, in the Ulster Championship. Derry were well set up there to take that scalp, but the nature of that defeat against Armagh in the qualifiers would have really, really stung. And I'm sure they would have enjoyed sending Armagh back to Division 2 this year on the back of that. So, yeah, it's like today is their time to answer those critics, and that's the way Mick finishes his piece. And they have to let their football do the talking now after all the noise and discontent that they had to deal with on the back of that flat championship defence last year. But we saw so many times under Mickey Hart when Tyrone were dealt with adversity. Obviously losing Cormac McCann, the tragedy of that, and to keep coming back and to win the 2005 All Ireland after that, and to do it again in a way. There's no better team to kind of have a cause. So it'll be interesting to see what they produce today, but they need a big statement. And if they do produce that, it's like that semi-final against Derry will be absolutely fascinating, because Derry are just a completely different animal now under Rory Gallagher. Winning Ulster last year was huge for them, and they want to go that extra step now. Just seeing Rory yesterday, he loved going back home to Enniskillen.
He had no problem celebrating in front of his own people whatsoever.
Yeah, he no problem with that whatsoever. So, yeah, today will be absolutely fascinating. Mightn't be one for the purists, but again, the role of the goalkeepers is going to be huge as well. I'm sure the two boys will take huge courage from Owen Lynch's point yesterday at Brewster Park too.
Conán, you can come in nicely on that one. I don't know whether you want to come in on that point firstly, or whether you want to come in on Rory Gallagher, because Rory Gallagher spoke to us after the game, and what I thought was quite interesting is we were talking about the pressure of championship, and now you've got a big few weeks coming up getting ready for the semi-final. He said actually he almost sees going to games as a break away from life itself.
Yeah, he said that's how he relaxes. I go to football, that's how you relax. and I'd probably be the same, although I'm not managing these teams. And I do think that's a form of relaxation. That's probably the most present he ever is. They talk about mindfulness. He's on the pitch, roaring and shouting at every single one of his players about what they have just done. He is nowhere else. His mind is not thinking about work. It's not thinking about any other worries. It's just thinking about getting that ball from one end of the pitch to the other. And that's probably the thing about Rory Gallagher as well. I mean, we're not going to get into a championship structure debate here, but I was looking at the Dublin, the league final that Derry were in, and they're walking wounded that day. They were without McKay and McAvoy, and Glass went off, and they were reshuffling the team, and you were thinking, of all the years, this is the one now to, like, Derry have won the last real Ulster Championship. Maybe that's the way I would put it now, But
your title, not mine. Go on.
The one that really mattered, they won it, but now they can afford to go out there. You're guaranteed to be in the last 16. Take the break, get your team reset. You're like, don't be struggling your way through this Ulster Championship. And there we are 2 weeks later. Conor Glass is in the middle of the pitch and he's limping off, and Christian McKay is waving to be brought off. But Gallagher just sees the here and now. He wants to win every ball, never mind every game. That's all he focuses on, and I think it's a healthy thing, really. I would probably, if I was in charge, and I never will be, would be thinking a bit more long term. But I can't really disagree with the job he's done, because it works with this group of players as well. It might not be for everyone, but he's really gotten a response. Like, I never thought I would see a Derry team respond, and the celebration. I mean, that just shows you how all in, how invested this man is, not just in Derry, but like in the game that he's watching, the team that he's managing. I don't think I would ever have the courage to do that in my own back garden. Like, if I was going up to Derry to manage another team and they scored a goal, I wouldn't be roaring and shouting and turning around to the crowd. I would probably really enjoy it inside, but I wouldn't be letting the whole county know how much I enjoyed it.
It brings us around very nicely to the modern goalkeeping debate, because I know that you did a video on this for The Independent not that long ago, so I'm sure this is right in your wheelhouse. Is Dermot Crowe's piece, which stretches across pages 8 and 9 of the Sunday Independent. He's looking at two goalkeepers who have been, in many ways, I guess, revolutionary in the way that teams can set up, in Rory Beggan and in Niall Morgan. It's been often copied, maybe not as well as those two over the last few years, but these are two very much innovators. And I thought was very interesting in Dermot's piece, which is that he was talking about an interview that Niall Morgan had done the year before last, where he said he just kind of went for a stroll in training to stay involved. And then Mickey Hart and the selectors looked at him and went, actually, you know what, he could be a useful force further out the field here.
100%. I highlighted the same thing, and it goes on to talk about the Kieran McGinley, Paul Courtney thing in Armagh as well, because I remember Paul Courtney when he was up at Queen's. He was just an unbelievable midfielder. It was him and Charlie Vernon in midfield. Suddenly I see him running around with no gloves on against Cavan and goals for Armagh, and he was just playing like a sevens goalkeeper. But yet again, I think it was Patrick Morrison who was the Armagh goalkeeper at the time as well, he was saying it wasn't that Geezer had asked him to come out the field. He just did it himself, and Geezer ran with it. And this is the thing, like, you could never imagine if you went back 8 years ago, or before, I suppose, Began and Niall, like, you know, before Began and these boys came in, like, they are by far the best at it, not Niall Morgan and Began. But if you had the conversation with the managers before that and said, I'm thinking about doing this, they would just say no way. And coaches generally don't like something until they see it works. So I'm not saying go out and show them it works, but once you show somebody it works, then they will usually buy into it. Like, they just need the proof. How often, if you think about the corporate world as well, nobody wants to do anything until you give them a proof point. Show them that actually this is surefire, there's no risk involved, this is going to work. And like, it's probably been for good and bad. The keepers all over now are trying it, and it's worth trying out, but not every keeper is going to be as good at it. Like, you know, Niall Morgan, the way he does it, he basically a sweeper in front of the full back line. He's cutting out ball that's going in because he's so fast, so nimble. He reads the game so well. Began's a bit different in that he's a playmaker. And I remember that same interview that Morgan done on the GAA social, and he had said something really stuck with him. One of the Tyrone management team said to him, "You're not Rory Began. Stop trying to be Rory Began." And that always stuck with him. But I think he developed his own way of doing it. They actually do play a bit differently, and they're both so supreme at it. But the piece that you're talking about that I did, it was focusing on the live goalkeeper doing it against Derry, Peter McStravick, and they have now
almost an extreme though. He's pushing up on opposition kick.
Yeah, and since then Derry are doing the same.
Yeah.
Derry are doing the same. And actually Owen Lyons did win a kick out. Now the analysis I done against live is that he was pushing up, but he wasn't interested in winning the kick. He was just going back. He wasn't trying to compete. Why the hell would he be caught around there? But Derry are a bit more daring in that sense. It's funny, for a conservative team and a defensive team, Derry leave themselves open in a lot of set plays, so there's opportunity there for other teams. But I think Live are now in their third iteration, their third outfield player trying it, and it's a debate I think that people are having all over the country. Is it easier to teach a goalkeeper how to play outfield, or is it easier to teach an outfield player to play in nets? And I actually don't know the answer, but I think I'm sort of leaning towards... No, it's sort of, I think Began and Niall Morgan are two extreme examples as well at the other end of the spectrum, because one of them is an outfield player who's also a good goalkeeper, in fairness, and one of them is a pure goalkeeper. But I'm leaning towards feeling like, if you played an outfielder in goals, what are you really missing? How many top class saves do we see, really? You know, that stops surefire goals. I don't know if there's that many. Normally when a player gets in, he buries it, or it's a bad miss. Like that's the way we look at it. How many big catches do we see right underneath the posts? I think an outfield player could do that anyway. Ethan Rafferty can do that better than anybody. He's a top class midfielder. So I wonder if you could teach somebody to kick the ball out, and that sounds like I'm degrading that act. That's a very hard thing to do. Yeah. But if you could teach them to do that, teach them the positioning, teach them how to communicate with the defence, I think that might be more beneficial if you wanted to use that player coming out from the back.
What do you think, Jason? I mean, some of this stood in my mind straight away when the comparison was made to Louth, is that Mickey Hart is a common line in this, and he's seen what can be done when Morgan does it, and therefore maybe he felt, I can empower my goalkeeper to do this if he adds that skill set to the team. Like, you're probably, if you are lacking someone maybe who has the experience between the sticks, if you bring someone in who is very good at fielding, very good at kicking and distributing, you could potentially add an extra player when you're trying to break the opposition down.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting one. Well, like, and you know, like, he obviously identified this with Morgan when he was Tyrone manager 10 years ago. Like, and like, I remember seeing Stephen Cluxton playing for Parnell's in a club game around 7 or 8 years ago, the harmless league game. Like, you know, it was after he'd won maybe the 2015 All-Ireland Dublin, I guess. And like, he was in the half back line, and he was just the absolute engine on the field, and he was just driving everything. And in terms of distribution, he was just a complete link man. He was like man of the match by a mile. So like, and I know he's done that for Parnell's nearly all the time, and that he very rarely played in goals for them, especially in the latter stages of his career. Like, so, you know, it's like, if a goalkeeper's a baller, then why not? Like, you know, like Mayo have a kicker now with Colin Reek. Like, he's going to be a huge asset to them. He's definitely hasn't got the ability like Morgan and Began in terms of coming out the field, but he is slowly but surely starting to get a bit braver in some of the games that we've seen. You know, but like, there's always that risk element as well. You know, you don't have to ask Gordon Lynch about it. You know, if you brought up Damien Comer's name to him, but like, it's just it can be such a weapon, and it's proven. And like, you know, like as pointed out in Dermot's piece, you could see Began and Morgan marking each other at some stage today, you know. Just like, you know, they were tackling each other in that 2021 Ulster final at Croke Park, like, and that's just the way things have gone. And fair play to Oran yesterday for kicking that point, you know, bringing it up now for the second time. But, you know, I couldn't help but smile. He backed himself and, you know, got in the middle of the play, and when he saw the shot was on, he took it and he planted it over the bar. It was a sweet score.
Got the punch from the edge of the D as well. It wasn't like you had to do something spectacular to put it over the bar. It was, the gap was there and he went through. There is one point, and I think the Galway game last year, the Derry Galway semi-final, is worth pointing out. It wasn't Oran Lynch who lost the ball, it was actually Conor Glass who lost the ball, but Oran Lynch is way up the sideline somewhere looking for the ball. But so often what happens, I'm amazed at how often players are, they play safe. A lot of players play safe, they pass the ball around. Then the goalkeeper gets it and he's the one with the bravery, he's the one with the gumption. I'm going to try and kick it in here, I'm going to try and kick a long range score. I watched Derry in that game against Galway hold the ball for over 2 minutes, and then Lynch gets it in the sideline and thinks, you know, it's me, Shane McGuigan's giving it to me, and now I have to try the shot. It was like, Shane McGuigan didn't pop it for you in a worse position to have a shot. But yeah, so there's a bit of teething there to figure out for goalkeepers. You know, you don't have to make the play all the time, and the player doesn't always have to give it to the goalkeeper either.
I wanted to bring it round to the athletics as well, because you both picked this out straight away. I kind of left you a blank canvas when we were messaging earlier to see what stood out for you in the newspapers today. And Carl Dennehy's been writing quite a bit about Rashida Adeleke and breaking her 2 records overnight in the United States. But also, I think he's got a lovely 2-page sit-down interview here with Katrina McKiernan, one of the greatest marathon runners that this country has ever produced. Carl has subtitled this as, "From a shy teen to the best female marathon runner in the world, running gave Katrina McKiernan so much." And also one that stood out for me, Jason, in this piece too, was the highlighted quote over on the second page, which is, "Behind the quiet, shy and unfailingly polite facade was an athlete who had to be selfish. She's not proud of that." And it's kind of outlined very nicely by Carl at the start by taking a quote from Roy Keane from the Tommy Tiernan show, and Katrina almost reflecting on her reaction to watching the show as well. That we've this lovely woman who's pictured in the middle of school children in County Cavan, but behind it there's this very, very tough athlete who is incredibly driven in the background.
Yeah, and like just like you mentioned there, well, like that opening sequence of Roy Keane sitting in front of Tommy Tiernan and saying that when he stopped playing football he didn't miss it. Katrina followed it up with saying that's not normal. You know, and like Tommy didn't press Roy on that on the night, and you know, everyone watching probably was mad for him to do so, but like that's kind of what she's talking about. Like, in a, you know, it's 25 years ago since she was winning these marathons, and just some of the times that she was getting. And there's a great insight actually, like when it goes back to her school days, and she's saying that, you know, she was always striving to get those standards, and if she didn't excel in certain subjects, she really beat herself up about it, and it really affected her. And that you know, running just always made her feel good. It made her feel at peace, you know, thinking about nothing else. And you know, she always just wanted that approval all the time, and that's probably why she went back in her later years as well. She wanted that approval again. You know, she gets into a lot of deeply personal stuff here as well, you know, about the breakdown of her marriage, and you know, there's so many ups and downs of her career, and you know, trying to just constantly fill that hole of ambition, and you know, just as a competitive athlete, like, and you know, missing out in the Olympics, you know, that's obviously a touchy subject for her, you know, after she was just excelling in all these records. And you know, it's an interesting the way the piece wraps up as well, as she often thinks what might have been had she, you know, had access to all the modern technology and the different running shoes that they have now, that probably would have knocked a few minutes off some of the incredible times that she got in some of those marathons. Like, and you can draw the comparison with Keane as well. You know, she finished up in 2004 when she was just 34. You know, she was just absolutely exhausted. Like, and you know, she talks about that record of 2 hours 22 minutes 23 seconds. It still stands as an Irish record, but she, you know, she was very quick to mention that Sinead Diver, the Mayo native in Australia, you know, she beat that. And even though she ended up being cruelly outdone of representing Ireland, she represented Australia, and she's adamant that she holds the record. Like, so she's got that humility about her as well. Like, and hands up, I would have known very little about Katrina McKiernan, but this piece is just brilliantly put together by Cahill, and no better man to describe about athletics than him, about one of the best, if not the best, we've ever produced.
Yeah, like Conán, when it comes to the end of her elite career, effectively 34 in 2004, by her own admission, completely exhausted by the decade that had gone before. And it's set up very nicely by Colin in the piece that she's right up there in podium places in European cross countries, going really well at the World Cross Country, clocking all these fantastic times where in many ways a marathon runner sometimes only peaks in their mid to late 30s. No way Beijing should have been there for her, but she felt her body was wrecked. Her family starts coming into consideration, that sometimes sport isn't absolutely everything, because we kind of have this perception that everything is tailored around an athlete just competing and being successful on an international stage, as opposed to all the other things that are happening in the background. And
this is where I do wonder if the Roy Keane thing was totally a lie. I know Roy Keane is a shell, like you're never going to get inside it. He's always going to just give you the thing that will push you away quickly as possible, or they'll give you something funny, because usually that pushes you away as well. But there are some parallels, as Jason says, like the fact that she did bow out before what you would consider the cardiovascular peak more than anything as well, like whatever amount of miles she had.
Pauline Curley ran for Ireland in Beijing past the age of 40
exactly
at the next Olympics. So Katrina should have been well placed at 38.
Yeah, and Eliud Kipchoge as well is coming into, like, I don't know where his prime is going to end, like, but it hasn't ended long past 34. So I do think, when I think about Roy Keane's career, I wonder, did he, I'm looking for a better word than fed up, but was he fed up not being the best? Because he was always the best. And Keane was an amazing footballer, sort of lost now to posterity, that we just think of him as a breaker, somebody who broke the play up when he did the job. Keane was unbelievable. If you watch, like, I don't need to, I'm preaching that he converted here, but the way he found space, the speed of him, like how nimble he was across the ground, players could just give him any type of ball in midfield and he would go find it. Like the way the defence could just push it into space and Keane would take it on. And then when he wasn't able to do that anymore, when he wasn't a box-to-box player, he became the best holding player in the world. And then suddenly it's all taken away from him, and he probably just thinks, I don't want to be crawling along here now. Like, and Tommy Tiernan could have pushed him, but sure, where would that have gotten him? Like, he pushed him on so many other things, and it was for nothing really. Keane just kept pushing him away. But yeah, so it's interesting when I look now at McKiernan's career, and I think about the ambition, like that's what it is, like that, it's total ambition, just trying to be better all the time. And she probably still has it now in her run in life, but everybody say youth is wasted on the young. Like I do think, I think sport and excellence is probably wasted on the ambitious, because McKiernan, Keane, these people never really just stopped to enjoy where they were at, and that's the paradox. That's why we love it. That's the beauty of sport. We sit back and we watch these people continue to strive, but because they're doing that, they don't stop and think, wow, I'm really doing this. Because the minute they do that, bang, it's over. It's, and I always remember Roy Keane's, remember the documentary back in the day, it was Roy Keane As I See It, as he was still a player, had it on VHS, still have it, can't get it working anymore obviously, but he always talked about the United fans coming up to him after the 99 Champions League final. I don't care if we don't win anything else ever again, and Keane, in his classic Keane way, just said, well, there's next year. We can win next year. And that's the thing, and there's obviously so much truth to that as well, and that's the way McKiernan's career was too. And it must be so hard to reckon with when that finishes, when that's over. Where do you go from then? Because you spent your entire career pushing, and yeah, it's something that I don't want to say thankfully we'll never have the experience, but I won't.
Jason, sometimes you wonder about that though, when it comes to people still being able to run. And you've got Katrina, you mentioned the fact that she still enjoys doing it for running's sake as opposed to being for competitive. It's actually, when it comes to team sports, I think Roy Keane is a very interesting comparison here, where Keane definitely said to us at our roadshow a few years ago as well, that with the exception of a few kick-arounds that he's had here and there, for the best part, he doesn't play football anymore. He's never been tempted to go back out and play fives. He's never been tempted to go do Astro. He cycles a bit. He goes for a few runs. He pokes the ball around from time to time. But football has never really stayed in his life as something to actually do post-retirement at all, when he easily could have done so.
Yeah, definitely. I was there that night of the roadshow you were talking about, and I was there for he done the Overlap podcast with Gary Neville and the lads in the Point a few weeks ago as well, and he just, he said that his exercise now is just walking the dog. That's what clears the head for him. Just brisk walks with the dog through his home in Cheshire. So it's it's hard to believe. Like, I think, like, judging by his book as well, when he went up to Celtic, I think he definitely didn't want to go out as maybe a dishevelled Roy Keane who was getting the runaround in Scotland. They had that famous cup defeat, I think, against Hamilton in his first game, and it was kind of welcome to Scotland after he bowed out. Like his last Man United game was against Liverpool at Anfield, and then there was that explosive exit. And there's so many ifs and buts around that great career as well. Like he still hasn't mended his relationship with Alex Ferguson, and Gary Neville would have said as well that Keane was always there, Ferguson on the field. So the two of them just always went in tandem. So there's always that case of what if, and Katrina has that in her own case with the Olympics and a few other different things, but the Olympics seems to be that case of what if around her. But just such a phenomenal career and life of achievement, and you can see where she got it. And I really enjoyed those paragraphs when she spoke about her school days, and when subjects frustrated her, she always wanted approval, and running gave her that, and that's why she went back to it again. And it was just a really, really brilliant piece. Really, really enjoyed it from start to finish.
Yeah, it just goes to show as well, Conán, how important the Olympics is to an athlete. Because I remember I was talking to David Gillick a couple of years ago during lockdown, and he said it was always a killer for him that he was such a good athlete at European Championships, particularly before Olympics, that he always felt he was going to be competing for an Olympic medal. He became an Olympian, was disappointed with his performance at the Olympics, and his now wife had to convince him a few years later to actually go and get the Olympic tattoo, which is generally a rite of passage. The minute you come back, you get the rings tattooed somewhere on your body. It took him a while to come to terms with it, and now a decade on at this stage, he still says the proudest achievement he has is actually being an Olympian, as opposed to the medals that he has, the Irish records that he held. Being an Olympian on reflection was so important. I think that comes across with Katrina here as well, that it is the ultimate goal for every track and field athlete is to actually go to an Olympics. Yeah,
it's almost a sore point. Yeah, as Jason says, she joked that don't want to talk about that. I didn't do much at it, but then there's also the cruelty of coming into Sydney and she just gets injured, and that's the thing as well. It's so fragile, the Olympics, because it's every 4 years. Yeah, and if you're doing this many miles that she's doing, going from middle distance to a long distance runner, you're going to get injured somewhere along the way, and you just have to hope that it's not in the build-up or at the event, at the Olympic event, when it's only so fleeting as well. And in your career peak, especially if you're going to leave at 34, you're not going to get many opportunities. But there was a piece that Paul Kimmage did as well. He was giving out about the day that Sonia O'Sullivan took Pádraig Harrington off the...
I didn't expect Second Captain's TV show from nearly a decade ago to come up in a Kimmage piece, but here we are.
Yeah, it was strange, but I did read it all, and I enjoyed the little journey back, even though it was only 8 years ago. But Shane Lowry wasn't too happy about Pádraig Harrington being put off, but I thought she had to take somebody off, and everybody on there was a top 10 list of if she took off Henry Shefflin, you'd be giving out stink. If she took off Maurice Fitzgerald, I'd be giving out stink. Somebody had to come off. She took out Pádraig Harrington. She put in Marcus O'Sullivan, put in a 4-time Olympian, a 3-time world champion. So this is it's just sort of depends on what sport you follow mostly as well. But of course, you're saying about how revered the Olympics are. Sonia O'Sullivan growing up looking at somebody like that and what they had done, that's huge. That's massive. So not to get into an argument about whether or not Pádraig Harrington should be on the good one.
We could be here for the rest of the hour if we decided who the 10 should be on the sport wall. But look, it's one of those things. These are remarkably subjective. We did sporting Mount Rushmores for every county during lockdown, when you're trying to find any content you possibly can when there's no live sport. And I remember Cork being an absolute S-fest when it was done, because there's legitimately, I would say in Cork particularly, 7 or 8 people who deserve to be on that Mount Rushmore, and it's very difficult to make an argument to take one of them off. And someone will straight away turn and say, why is Jimmy Barry Murphy not there? Dual star, he did everything for the county, as a manager and as a player, have him there. How could you possibly take Christy Ring off? One of the most well-known athletes the country over. But still, there's international athletes like Roy Keane, Sonia O'Sullivan.
Wow.
I don't know how you can ever rank their achievements against each other, really. How could you possibly leave Ronan O'Gara off? That's the difficulty, but that is the wonder of the debates. I think Kimmage gets to the point very well that all of these are remarkably subjective, but also making the point that a guy he reveres in Pádraig Harrington should be right up there on the Irish Mount Rushmore, no matter what. And Harrington's actually interviewed with Dermot Gillespie on the section across from there as well, which I think is a pretty interesting piece. I mean, it's something we can discuss a little bit if you want, but Jason, he talks to Harrington Gillespie about himself, but also quite a bit about Rory McIlroy. And we've probably all been having the post-mortems, and all of us golfers who struggle to hack it around 18 holes will turn around and say, Rory, just seems to be some kind of psychological issue around the majors now, and particularly around the Masters. He's passed up £3 million to play at the RBC Heritage this week. Again, hugely disappointed to come in tremendous form and then not to make the cut. And then Harrington, who by his own admission within the interview with Dermot Gillespie says, I've been accused of overthinking throughout my career, of overdoing my swing, of all the different technical aspects. He reckons that Rory McIlroy just needs to kind of calm down, and that a major will come with the way that he's playing.
Yeah, I read the piece, but a lot of, like, golf wouldn't be my forte by any means. Well, but I did manage to catch the end of the Masters last week, and Rory was well out of contention by then. But he just seems to put so much pressure on himself when it comes to Augusta in particular, and that's what kind of maybe leads to his downfall. I don't know if you'd agree with that or not, but like, he just seems to just put so much demand and pressure on himself. It seems to be just something that he's reaching out for and trying to grab all the time that just kind of slips out of his grasp. And for it to happen so early for him would have been a massive blow. And like, fair play to him. Like, he was speaking to the media when he was going up through the fairways and between holes and stuff like that, and it was really, really fascinating and insightful to see that. But it'll be hugely disappointing for him. But like, the mental aspect of it, and the spotlight that's always on him in particular, not just from an Irish sense but a global sense, is huge. And I don't know how he deals with it. Like, and the weight that's constantly on his shoulders, I don't know how he manages to keep continuing that. Like, just to reference Katrina McKiernan again, like, she said that when she was at her pomp and everything else, she was so glad that Sonia was nearly taking all the spotlight, so she could just focus on her own thing and kind of stay in the background a little bit when it came to the media. But like, the likes of Rory now, like, there's how many hundreds of cameras on them from phones alone each time they go through a hole, and all those eyes on you. Like, it beggars belief how they do it, and let alone how he does it with the spotlight that's on him.
Conán, I'll ask you one question away from the piece itself, but we were wondering about this week about McIlroy. Is it a wise decision or not when all that pressure is there and everyone is talking about, you're waiting a decade to get to your next major, you haven't completed the Grand Slam yet, 2013 you let a Masters slip away in the back nine, to actually put an AirPod in and talk to CBS in the middle of your round? Is he a guy who should have said no to that?
Like, at the time I thought it was a wise decision. I thought, oh, here we go, here's Rory looking relaxed now, he's trying a different approach. When you don't win, when you don't make the cut, then it's, we can all say, it's not a wise decision. I think, at the risk of venturing into judging personalities, which is exactly what Pádraig Harrington was giving out about. And he's right. Like, again, I have another moment where I'm like, is he talking about me there? Where it's like, most of you guys aren't in a position to judge these players' personalities, but that's how golf analysis goes. And like, that's the beauty of golf as a spectator. Like, you sit back and you watch it, and it's all these. Every single shot is a shot that every one of these professional players would make if you told them to just go make it. But when you have to do it over 18 holes, over 4 days, over all that pressure as well, then with all the eyes on you, you're not going to make some of the shots, and you have to deal with the comeback. But I think I'm going to venture into analysing Rory's personality now, but it's sort of, he had gone the aggressive route, he had gone the timid route, he had gone the respect Augusta route. And Rory, I think his star is getting brighter and brighter in terms of how everybody sees him in the media. It's becoming more of a wider consensus that everyone seems to like Rory McIlroy and everyone's rooting for him. I don't think it was always like that. I think it has gotten brighter and brighter. And when I saw him walking down the fairway talking, did an interview, I thought, why not? Why not do this? Like, yeah, it's just another game of golf. I thought that's maybe the way he's going at it. I'll just treat this like another game of golf. But then actually, any other game of golf, does he do that? Does he be interviewed in between each shot? I don't know. Incredibly
rarely. And this is the first time they've done this at the Masters, which is such a prestige event. And I think a lot of people's feeling was, you don't need gimmicks like this to sell the Masters. The Masters sells itself by the prestige of the competition. And what was interesting was that on the Friday, obviously Rory gave away a bit about his approach, and he was respecting Augusta on the Friday at a time when particularly Brooks Koepka was pulling away at that stage, and Ram started to do well too. And you're just thinking, Rory, at this stage you're 8 to 9 shots behind. You're going to have to be aggressive. Like, you're going out one way or another here by the looks of it. You either go out swinging and get down below par into the weekend, or you play timidly, and even if you do make the cut, you're going to be out of contention anyway. And Rory McIlroy's inclination was to play it very safe and very conservative on the Friday, and it came back to bite him. So I don't know. I kind of agree with Harrington, though. I'm not in the camp where people say he's never going to win a major again. And Harrington says that. He says maybe he wins a major, and that actually lifts all this weight and all the talk, and everything will go away if he wins another one. He wins the Open this summer at St Andrews. Maybe it's slightly different then, but I don't know. The pressure is mounting because of the time. I think the pressure is mounting because of what Roy did last year as well, where he won both of the Order of Merits, and he became the man of the PGA Tour. The other thing as well, I was thinking on the golf, and probably won't have time to go into it, but I thought it was an interesting quote in the middle of it, is that Paul McGinley is interviewed in the Daily Mail on Sunday today, and he talks about the fact that he would have probably joined Live Golf 10 years ago when he was still an active player on the circuit. He would have seen $20 million as too much to turn down. But now the way he sees it is that the victories in the courts, particularly that the DP World Tour Championship have had, are going to be important, because his concern is that if Live Golf continue to sign up elite players, that market might go for young players coming out of college to try and make their money. And he still thinks the PGA Tour is the best way to do so. But an admission by Paul McGinley there that he would have probably joined Live Golf 10 years ago had the opportunity been there. There's plenty of other meaty bits across the papers today, and one that definitely gets a huge amount of coverage, lads, front and back page today, including to the point that the Mail on Sunday are taking credit for saving the Grand National. Is actually on the front of the Mail on Sunday today, but on the back they've serialised the comments which come from AP McCoy. So the context of this is the Entry Grand National. 3 more horses died in the 175th running. They were Hill 16, Dark Raven and Envoy Special. Hill 16 died after the race after a fall at the first. 62 horses have now died at the Entry Racing Festival since 2000, including 16 in Grand Nationals in that period. On the track, the favourite Cork Rambler won the race. Sligo jockey Derek Fox was on board there after the race was delayed by animal rights protesters for around about 15 minutes. And AP McCoy was venting his fury, as the paper puts it, Dominic King's piece, on the back of the Irish Mail on Sunday. And it was AP McCoy's comments which came on ITV Racing, where basically he said they're attention seekers and, quote, unfortunately we're giving them attention. These people don't have any understanding of horses and how well they're cared for, end quote. And also Lucinda Russell, who was the winning trainer of Cork Rambler, well, the co-trainer of Cork Rambler at least, had said as well, it all seems pointless. She said it's a real pain in the neck. Are the protesters doing it for themselves or for the horses? Jason, I'll let you go first on this one, because obviously this has got a tremendous amount of attention, the protests that took place. They were flagged up early in the week. There were discussions, I think, on Sky News, on GB News during the week that this was going to happen. And animal rights protesters were saying that they would be trying to bring the most famous steeplechase in the world to a stop yesterday. In the end, it was a 15-minute break. The racing community have very strongly come out and condemned it. What's your take on the coverage in the papers of it today?
Coverage in the paper seems to be definitely in unison with the racing community. Just that they don't, maybe, as AP said, that they shouldn't be getting airtime. But like, it just sets a worrying thing in terms of, are we going to get to the stage where a protester is killed here? Because 2 of them have tried to glue themselves to a fence, and I know there's been several close calls with things like this where protesters have just been managed to be evicted from a track just as horses were about to come trundling down towards them, So that is the worrying thing. They probably did get what they wanted in terms of the exposure. I think they used ladders to gain access to the complex. I've been at Entry before. You have to add it to them in terms of how they got in and how they managed to evade all the heavy security and actually get onto the track, given that this had been flagged as a potential possibility. I see Ed Chamberlain coming out fighting as well. He's obviously the main anchor of ITV's racing coverage as well, defending how the horses are treated and the care that they get and the 6-star pampering, as he described it, in the stables and away from the track and the big racing days and that. And, I suppose it doesn't bode well then when a couple of horses do have to be euthanized after the race itself because their injuries are so damaging. But David Walsh made a good point in the Sunday Times as well, in a brief comment piece. I think it's just inside the sports section. He obviously wrote it live after the national that maybe just the field is a bit too large in terms of 40 that are named initially, and then you obviously have your few non-winners. But I know a lot has been done in terms of safety for the jockeys and the horses, but the field and the length of the race just seem to maybe getting a wee bit too stretched. Maybe I'm wrong on that. I'm no expert on the racing either, but like, the protesters did get what they wanted. They didn't get the race stopped, but they did get the exposure that they were looking for. They did manage to get onto the track, and they managed to get the biggest race in the calendar held up for 15 minutes. So the racing purists will say that it didn't affect the race itself, but to hold up that race for 15 minutes is a significant achievement. But there's no doubt, like, these horses are bred to race. They're not, they wouldn't be here if there was no race, and David made that point as well. So that's what they're here for. That's what they're bred for. And they do get huge attention and love and care, and that has to be considered here as well. So it's a really, really tricky debate. It's going to cause a lot of tension and, you know, a lot of different views and opinions from today and on through the rest of the week as well, no doubt. So it's a tricky one, Will.
Yeah, I mean, Conán, I would suggest that the tone is very different from the front of these papers to the back of the papers.
Yeah.
Generally what's found in the back 10 pages has been a little bit like, look, Brow Scott's got his piece, which is just across from David Walsh's in the Times, where it's spread across pages 2 and 3, and his title is "Favoured Rises Above the Chaos." A very much feeling of, there was this protest, some of the horses may well have even been spooked in the 15-20 minutes before the race, and the race took place, and there's been a winner of the race in Cork Rambler, who he has said was as impressive as Red Rum, and he's even got a little piece in here which has been cut from his report 50 years ago when Red Rum won his first one. Said that the finish was that strong it actually stands up there with it. But that seems to be the feeling from the racing writers, from the commentators, from those who've been interviewed, which is, this happened, the race happened regardless, and it was almost a triumph that it took place despite the attempts to stop it. While in the front pages there's a lot more focus on what's probably coming from the animal rights groups.
Yeah, I think a lot of the coverage is saying that they didn't spoil the big day, but they did spoil the coverage of it because, as you say, it is mentioned all over the coverage. You read out one headline there, the Mail on Sunday, it's Rambler brushes off the chaos. Their back page is a quote from AP McCoy, they don't get racing. The whole back page story is AP McCoy sending their attention seekers. So in a sense, it did spoil the coverage, even from a sporting standpoint as well. That's what they were getting into, and yeah, like it's a tricky one, as Jason says. It's one I'm almost more comfortable talking about Rory McIlroy's psychology than getting into the depths of this. But I do remember doing a couple of pieces, down with Jessica Harrington down in her stables, and down with Joseph O'Brien as well, and like just being struck because, you know, coming from Derry, I'm not a big horse racing aficionado, but being struck by the lifestyle down there. I remember coming away from those days thinking, geez, I wouldn't mind getting into horse racing. Like, you know, I could live every day here in these stables, because it was just like, when we were down with Joseph O'Brien, the place is covered in snow, but the horses have to be taken out multiple times a day, and yeah, like they are treated consciously. Like they are. There's a lot of deliberate thought into everything about their life as well, like down in those stables. So that's one thing that always stuck with me, at how beautiful the landscape was and how routine everything was, working 365 days a year to make sure that the horses were getting the treatment that they felt they needed.
Jason, I'll give you a first shout on the Lee Chin coverage from today, because there's quite a few pieces here. Mark Gallagher, I think, has written very well on page 62 of the Mail on Sunday. Mick Foley has also covered it in the Times with a kind of a wider lens on page 18 around the challenge that's required, and I think he outlines very well that this is not an isolated incident, that it's been about 10 years since Lee Chin first reported that he was racially abused, but he points out a number of incidents in the last year in particular, and even some just a few weeks ago, that this wasn't just an isolated incident at that charity match at the Carrick Swans Club from last week, but pretty strong condemnation of what happened last weekend from both Mark Gallagher and from Mick Foley today.
Yeah, and just to kind of start on Mark's piece, like when you mentioned there that Lee Chin was spoken to about this 10 years ago, like I think the perpetrators in that incident got an 8-week suspension. It kind of speaks for itself and beggars belief. I know if it happens in a GAA match now, there's a 48-week ban and 96 weeks for a repeat infraction, but you know, I still don't even think that's good enough. I think any perpetrator of something like this, inside or outside of the gates of a GAA pitch, the consequences have to be severe. In terms of GAA, I think the perpetrator in question here should never set foot at a match again. You know, we've all seen the video. There was children present. Kudos to Lee's teammates for calling it out straight away and sticking up for him. And I know we've all said that, you know, the incident's getting highlighted because it's Lee. Of course it is. Like, he's a great fella. There's no question about that. He's a magnificent role model. But Mark's piece highlights the fact that this is now quick becoming a societal issue. You know, there's significant noise coming from, which is still thankfully a minority, the anti-immigration brigade here in this country. And that, you know, there's just big worry over the amount of these incidents that are taking place in Ireland outside of a sporting field that are going unreported. That, you know, they're happening on the street, they're happening in schools, they're happening in workplaces. And, you know, Mark's piece ties in very well that the role of sport can have in damaging this. And it all starts with education in our schools, with young people, and education, you know, with young people when they're in a sporting environment as well. Because this just simply is unacceptable. Like, you know, the Irish Network Against Racism last month revealed, this is in Mark's piece, there were 600 racist incidents recorded over the course of last year, including 136 reports of hate speech. That was a rise from 404 such incidents the year before. So those are concerning figures. They've quite clearly gone up. You know, and it's becoming a societal issue, and it's an education issue. And in terms of GAA, there should be an absolute no tolerance approach here. Whether it was Lee Chin or a junior player in Kerry or wherever, it's just totally unacceptable. It's disgusting, and the video was just horrendous. It was gut wrenching, especially the fact that there were kids present, and that's where that education needs to start to show our young people, in a sporting context or otherwise, that this behaviour is just simply not acceptable.
Yeah, wider context of this then is that it's only a few weeks ago that the Under-15 Republic of Ireland team, a picture was put up and there was abuse online about the amount of black players who were on that team. There was racial abuse not that long afterwards. I think it was like later in the week against the Kerry FC players, which also happened online. The FAI said they were taking an incredibly strong line. They've been working with the Gardaí about that. In the case of this incident, which also followed a racist comment being made in a challenge game between the Waterford and Offaly Miners in a hurling game, which resulted in an Offaly player writing an apology and sending it to his Waterford counterparts. And then you have this Lee Chin incident happening at the charity game. I was talking to James Skell, who was both played against and with Lee Chin on Railway Cup teams, and he said his one takeaway was that Rory O'Connor was incredibly composed, Conán, not to actually strike the guy who had made the comments, because Rory O'Connor goes over initially to confront him, and then you can hear Lee Chin in the background making the point that there are children right behind him, where these comments have been shouted in the 69th minute of a charity game as well, which makes it to me feel all the more worse that someone would do that in such a circumstance. But I asked both Skell and Paul Murphy in the Hurling Pod this week if even it was the higher end, and say the GAA said, actually, because of the way this incident happened, we're going to go with 96 weeks, which is the longest possible ban we can hand out at the moment. They thought 96 weeks isn't even enough.
Yeah, like, why do we need this person in 97 weeks' time? Like, what is anybody gaining from that? I think it's ridiculous. I can't wrap my head around it, to be honest. I think you're right. Rory O'Connor, I'm looking for the strong enough word. He's almost a hero for confronting it immediately. Confronting it the way he did as well. And
Skell said he would have hit the fan.
And then this is the thing that I'm wrangling with myself. Like, you know, so confront him with it to the point that, because you want to show your anger, you want to show that this is not acceptable. But I think the way he stopped it before he hit him was like, and he deserved all the kudos in the world. We're talking about reported incidents here. Like, I played in a game over a decade ago now, a club match, and one of my teammates was racially abused just in the course of an argument, and it's all anybody wanted to talk about then for the rest of the game and for afterwards as well. And it didn't go reported because the player didn't want it reported, and
the game carried on.
Yeah, the game carried on, and this is the heartbreaking thing. Then the player doesn't want that attention brought on him. Of course he doesn't. Like, and the way that was solved, and I don't know if anybody deserves credit here, but the manager of the opposing team, when he found out about it, he dragged his player into our changing room. You know, which I suppose, in a sense, I don't want to say brave because that's far too kind, but bringing him into the middle of the changing room and making him apologise, it's definitely making a point of him there and then. And it was him trying to deal with it, but almost that's part of the problem as well. It's like, you know, that's it, solved now. Like, you know, we've said sorry, let's move on. It's crazy. I don't understand how fragile you'd have to be to shout something like that in. I mean, whatever about, sometimes people see these incidents and think, well, a fair game. Lee Chin's having an argument with somebody there. Imagine you and I was having an argument in the street, and somebody just started abusing us because of where we were from. Just standing on the side, started roaring abuse at where I was from. Me and you, and this is like me and you living in Ireland as two white males here, like, you know, so it's not like it's not like we're suffering any great deal in our day-to-day lives. But yeah, I can't wrap my head around how that's where you reach to. I know people reach to something when they want to criticise somebody, but my God, like, how is that even a criticism where somebody's parents or somebody's grandparents are from? I don't understand where this is coming from and where this trend is growing and how it's happening, but it very much is. Yeah,
I say plenty covered, particularly in those two pieces today on the Lee Chin situation. Jason, I want to ask you about the bid for Ireland to host some games at Euro 2028. I'm particularly interested because of Pascal O'Donoghue's comments, which were yesterday, where it looks like if the Irish government now end up putting money towards Caisson Park as part of the bid, potentially the final bill for Ireland could be somewhere around €96 million in order to host the games. And Pascal Donoghue was admitting that it might be difficult to actually see even a return on that investment if there was 3 or 4 games to be played on the island of Ireland at Euro 2028. I think Paul Rowan has done a pretty interesting piece on this today.
Yeah, well, fairly interesting reading from Paul. You know, we must mention as well, from a GAA point of view, there was plenty of eyebrows raised when Croke Park were taken off the bed, and I kind of had to smirk when it said in Paul's piece that, you know, UEFA didn't want Croke Park holding an unglamorous group stage tie with only a half-full stadium, so they must have been watching the Leinster Championship recently. But yeah, it could put 240 million into the economy, which is the other thing. But like, the most significant row now, and you know, Conán will be well qualified to talk about this too, is the Casement Park debacle. Obviously, the stadium has been closed for 10 years. It's become an absolute eyesore, and it's become a metaphorical eyesore for everybody in the Antrim and Ulster GAA community. And you know, it looked like that this was going to be the great beacon of light to get it built, but now the DUP have rode their oar in, and they're objecting that the money shouldn't be given to get Casement built, and it should go towards other services in the north. So this could potentially get messy. You know, the IFA have had to accept that Casement Park would be the venue here as opposed to their own home at Windsor Park as well. And there's that element to things here as well, the cross-border function of the bid, along with the FAA. So, like, there's, as Paul rightly points out as well, there's still a lot of there's probably still a lot of bitterness around here that the Euro 2020 games that we were all excited to host. I think it was 4 fixtures in total never took place here because of our COVID restrictions, and the other chosen cities across the continent still got to host their games as well. So there was an element of getting big matches to Dublin, but you know, it even looks like in the current bid that the Dublin Arena, as the Aviva is going to be tied at, is only going to host maybe at best a last 16 tie, 4 group games and a quarter final. So I know they were hoping to maybe have a semi-final here, especially if Croke Park was part of the bid, and maybe even Croke Park to be part of the opening ceremony as well. So it's an interesting one. You know, there's going to be a lot of noise about this coming down the tracks as well. But from a GAA point of view, I know Croke Park's omission was the big thing. So it'll be interesting to see what happens going down the line, and it could all be swept, completely brushed away by Turkey's bid as well if they get it when the decision's made later in the year. I think it's due in October or November.
I think on the case in point, Conán, effectively a shovel has to go into the ground by summer 2024 to satisfy this bid. That seems a very, very short timeline for a stadium that's been fighting for funding, where there's no real sign that the DUP are going to go back in to reopen Stormont anytime soon. Yeah. And as Jason has just mentioned, you DUP councillors and MLAs across the weekend saying Casement Park should be pretty far down the totem pole of what's important now.
Yeah, well, I think anything important is pretty far down the totem pole of what's important when it comes to the DUP, and this would be important, not just for what it would do for the GAA community and for Belfast. Like, Antrim is so fractured now at the minute GAA wise because of the separation that's happened, because they're not playing their games in Belfast, but for what it would do for the area, like, Jason's right to point out the COVID restrictions in 2020. Like, that would have been such a big opportunity for Ireland to show what it could do. Even to have those, send the words now, proof points to show, like, oh look, this worked. This is a great festival of football when it comes here. But like, it would actually just rejuvenate that whole area, then having big international games. And like, the reality is, Windsor Park wouldn't be fit for it. It's not fit for it, and there's no plans. There's never been any petition in it. It's not going to be at the level that Casement Park would be at.
It's way off the UEFA standards.
Way off. And the problem, of course, is England. So ideally this would be a way cooler bid if you had the 4 associations, the Scotland, Wales, the Northern Ireland Association and the Irish one. But England's almost like a metal hip in that, like, you need it, but you sort of wish he didn't need it, you know, and we can't make it up without them. And I was trying to think, can we get 10 stadiums somewhere? If you bring in Croke Park, Casement Park, the Aviva, there's 3 in Glasgow, 2 in Cardiff that are a mile apart, which is probably problematic in itself. That's still 8. We still need to build 2 more on top of Casement, which we need to build. So I don't know if those...
The Celtic bid is dead.
I don't think it's going to happen, though. So we do need England, unfortunately.
And England don't need the Celtic bid.
Yeah,
they really
that's
need
the
the votes
strange
for
thing. Yeah.
Really and truly. And then, of course, they had to kind of create this it was almost artificially brought in. It had to be only one stadium per city, with the exception of London.
Yeah.
So therefore, you could have easily had Everton's new stadium, rejuvenated Anfield. Like Glasgow easily has 2 stadia that could have been used in this bid, but yet they didn't want to get into that territory where it would be only a few cities. They had to spread it around to keep everyone happy, and therefore Dublin missed out as a result. I kind of wonder if Croke Park may well become the fallback if Casement can't be completed and if the bid actually goes through. I wouldn't totally think that it's dead on arrival, but
that would be such a big shame for Belfast, I think. Even I was looking at Mark Sykes coming through into the Republic of Ireland team, and I'm like, where are all the other Belfast players? Like, where are they? There's just not a big long history of players from Belfast coming from the second biggest city in the
and Casement needs a financial shot in the arm somehow.
Yeah.
And this is a possibility for funding to maybe be opened up, because it's something bigger than just the project itself.
Yeah, exactly.
And you've also got potentially support from the UK and Ireland financially to get it done.
Yeah.
This might be the only way to actually get Casement Park and get a shovel in the ground. The rugby is where I want to finish up on, lads, because again this kind of took a life of its own on Thursday with the report that was in the Telegraph. And Sinead Hassan, I think, writes very well on page 10 of the Sunday Independent today, and Aoife English is also writing really well about it on page 61 of the Mail on Sunday about the Ireland women's team. And Sinead Hassan has got the headline here: the reality is that Ireland are being left behind. And she also points out very nicely, Conán, that it doesn't get any easier for Ireland now. After that defeat against Italy, they've got the world's second best team in England and the best team in the Northern Hemisphere coming next time round to Cork, and it could well be a drubbing. They absolutely hammered Wales, who hammered Ireland earlier on in the championship. Ireland have been conceding tries all over the place, and the bigger part of all of this are the whistleblowing reports that come out on Thursday about, lack of things that have been made available for the women's team, some of the measures around blue shorts coming in just being PR as opposed to being something they were consulted about, players not receiving information when they've been dropped from squads. There's just a general feeling that probably Irish rugby's got a long way to come at a time when their men's team are the best team in Europe right now.
Such a lost opportunity because of that. I feel like there could have been such easy momentum coming into this tournament off the back of the last tournament. The TV rights deals that people are committed to now to showing them. Sinead's right to point out that England coming to town exactly isn't great. The fact that it's at home as well in Musgrave Park just makes it worse. I think England have played 3 games. Their points difference at the minute is 170. Like they've played Wales, they hammered them. Wales here in second place. It was 59-3. So this is what's facing Ireland now, and I'm saying a lost opportunity off the back of what the men have done, but it's also a lost opportunity off the back of what the women had done as well, like in building themselves into a competitive side and putting themselves into Six Nations contention and winning them and hosting a Rugby World Cup. Like, it was such an opportunity to push on, but they never did. And the reality is, as Sinead says, they're so far down the line now. It's like night and day with what's happening with the men's team at the minute. Yeah,
I mean, I look over your shoulder right there, the Grand Slam winning team photo, which is just there 10 years ago. They weren't invited to the Aviva for the game against England this year, which I think was a mistake. I think that was a big PR mistake by the RFU. And that's something, Jason, that's brought up on just very, very simple points brought up by Aoife in the Mail on Sunday, including something as simple as, you go to the FAI website right now, you've got a tab for the women's team, a tab for the men's team. The FAI website's been obviously covering the women's team extensively because of the World Cup in Australia and New Zealand this coming summer. You go onto the RFU and it feels like the women's team are almost forgotten about. They're not visual when it comes to the actual website. These are small things, but they're certainly a perception for a supporter when they go to look at a website which is hosted by a national governing body.
Yeah, and this is very well laid out. It's an Orla McIlroy's comment piece under Aoife's match report. Orla starts off, as you mentioned, about you go straight to the FAI website, but she finishes up her piece very cleverly by going back to 2017 in relation to the FAI as well, when Katie McCabe was part of that infamous press conference when the Irish women's team said enough was enough in terms of having to give back gear and having to change in bathrooms and all of the horrible stuff that they laid out there on the table. Katie McCabe was part of that press conference, and in July she's going to be leading us out in the World Cup in Australia. So, did the IRFU not learn anything from this and from the complete fiasco that was only 6 years ago? And now our football team are going to the World Cup, the biggest show on earth. They ran the States, they gave the States everything to think about on the field the other night in a friendly, who are going to the third World Cup on the trot. And it just beggars belief. Orla finishes off her piece with a very poignant paragraph, and she said, "Just start by treating them like players. It's the least they deserve." So, it's a very well written piece that really, really hits home, and it's shocking, really, a lot of the points that are made. Like, why should some of these women give up a career for a 12-month, €15,000 contract? And she's nailing down the point that women's rugby is just constantly an afterthought here. And, the fact that she references the end of the piece with that 2017 fiasco in the FAA, and Keane McKiernan in particular, who's our captain now and is a star player for Arsenal, leading Vera Pauw's team into a World Cup, with the whole country behind them, compared to what's happening with the rugby team, and the fact that they're shipping record defeats and going to get a wooden spoon. It's very, very difficult to comprehend.
Yeah, particularly crazy to think while Liberty Hall was taking place, Ireland were getting ready to host the Women's Rugby World Cup. At the previous one, they had finished in the top 4. They had beaten New Zealand, who are now the best team of the world right now. And they're watching even Wales and Scotland move further ahead. It was kind of accepted that England and France were gone ahead because of their professionalism, but now the other countries within the Six Nations are starting to leave them behind as well. Lads, it's been an absolute pleasure having a look at the Sunday papers with you. If you've missed any of the Sunday paper review, you can watch it back on our Off the Ball YouTube, and also if you want to listen to us in audio form, you can do so by going to the Sunday paper reviews wherever you pick up your podcasts, or in the Off the Ball daily feed as well. We'll be back reviewing the Sunday papers next Sunday afternoon.